Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Earthly Headlines. Happy Monday. Today we're going to talk about star systems and how ancient people figured out that these very intricate details about them. And just in a nutshell, if you guys aren't into astronomy or anything like that, just look in the sky at night, preferably in a place with no light pollution like the desert or something like that. Spend like an evening looking out there. And just tell me what your naked eye could see. Now, if you're unfortunate enough to live in a city and you can't get out to the desert and look, even with the naked eye, you'll be surprised at how much you could see. To really know the details, to come away at night, like after the night you go out there, and to come away with any sort of information about the variability of the star's brightness, how far away it is, whether it's the brightest star in the sky or not. All those details are pretty hard to glean from just one night of looking at the stars. But there are people who lived a long time ago that knew not only what star was the brightest, but they knew stuff about their orbital patterns. They assigned human characteristics to these star systems. It gets really, really far out there. And there's this one particular star called Algol, which across all kinds of civilizations, whether it's the Chinese, the ancient Egyptians, the Greeks, the Romans, even the Native American Indians, they all mention Algol as some sort of sinister or bad luck star. And they derive that from it not only in its place in the sky, but its brightness. So Algol is a 3-star system. For a long time, it was thought to be a 2-star system. And when I say that, I mean when modern astronomy became enhanced using all the telescopes and all these different types of algorithms to analyze the sky. They thought it was a 2-star system until a few hundred years ago, less than a few hundred years, like probably 150 years ago. They figured out that it was actually a triple star system. And here's a pretty good picture of Algol here. So every month or so, there's an eclipse. So Algol B and Algol A, they kind of orbit around each other, and then when they cross, there's an eclipse. And the ancient people figured this out a long time ago. And this headline reads, "Ancient Egyptians discovered Algol's variability 3,000 years before Western astronomers," which is true, but they don't. Again, this is one of those headlines where it's only the earliest. They only found the earliest recording of its mention, so they don't know how the ancient Egyptians came to discover Algol or their thought process behind it. They just know that it was written down on some papyrus, or I think it was papyrus. Yeah, papyrus. On this piece of papyrus called the Cairo Calendar, which basically cataloged everything in the sky and put some dates into when to view these stars and what it's going to look like at this time, where it's going to be in the sky at what time. So it was like a really ancient way of keeping time. But again, going back to my original thought experiment, where you go outside and you just use dead reckoning, it's going to be a tall task for you to come up with something like a calendar where not only Algol, but all the star systems visible from the Earth, you're going to be catalog all of these and know definitively where they're going to be. And on top of that, you're going to build this lore and this character development and attach these qualities to stars. So, I mean, they've done this with Polaris. They've done this with Vega. Sirius is really a popular. When I say popular, I mean it's been just rediscovered and written about over and over again in these texts. The Dogon tribe come to mind, right? If you guys don't know about the Dogon, they're this seemingly remote tribe that somehow has absolute trove of information, astronomical information about the stars, specifically the Sirius stars. So anyway, let's talk more about Algol, since this is what this article is about. Algol is the brightest star in the Perseus constellation, and it's so here's the constellation, and then you have Perseus cutting off the head of the Gorgon, and Algol's the brightest star in this of the Gorgon head, basically. So from there, right away, the Gorgon again is like a demon, a monster, whatever. This is the beginning of this pattern you'll see where ancient cultures attribute Algol to this sinister deity. The Cairo Calendar, or the calendar of lucky and unlucky days. The document itself dates 1244 to 1163 BC, so roughly 3,000 plus years ago. And again, it predicts what year is lucky, what isn't. And the Chinese calendar is very similar. People, even to this day, people who want to have a baby, they want to time it to where it's a good year. So the year of the dragon is actually a really popular time to have a baby if you're Chinese, because of all the good blessing. So the Egyptians took it a step further, though. They documented every single day and determined whether it's going to be a good or bad day. So they took this so far as to even the pharaoh, or not the pharaoh, but kings of other civilizations, they'll have a seer who will advise them when it's a good time to, like, say, start a war, to levy taxes, to have certain events. So they took this very, very seriously. It's not like it is now, where it's just a side article on like the horoscopes or something like that. It's definitely has not been reduced that low back in the day. It was actually intertwined in daily life, and it figured into their equation for having a good life. So there's other information too, behavior of astronomical objects, so like comets, meteors, and then Algol, right? So there's a lot of symbolism involved in Egyptian myths, and so I don't want to get into it here, but the Sphinx and the Milky Way, the Nile River, and the Orion correlation between the Great Pyramids at Giza, they all were built based on the heavens, the stars. So the Nile was supposed to represent the Milky Way. The Sphinx the Sphinx used to have a head of a lion, and it was facing toward the constellation of Leo when you would look east toward the equinox in the spring. When the sun right before the sun would come up, you would see clearly the constellation of Leo, and that's what the Sphinx was there for. And then the Great Pyramids, the three Great Pyramids, they are aligned with Orion, the constellation Orion. And you guys can look that up. It's called the Orion correlation. There are books written about it. I think Robert Bivol wrote that book. I'm pretty sure it's called the Orion correlation. But this isn't new. The fact that the Egyptians looked to the stars for guidance is not new, and they built their civilization around it, like it was the foundation. Anyway, this group of scientists, they published this paper in this journal called Open Astronomy, and then in the paper they look at how the legends of the Egyptian deities Horus and Set were used in the calendar. And so Horus and Set describe the behavior of astronomical objects, obviously, and in this case Algol, which is visible to the naked eye. And so in this paper, they discuss that nothing is known about who recorded Algol's period in the Cairo calendar, or how. I mentioned this earlier. Again, that's probably indicative that either the knowledge came from someone else, which most likely it did. Someone somewhere had to do the legwork. I don't think it was the Egyptians that did, though. And when I say legwork, I mean do these hardcore observations and note-taking every day to figure out the path and the behavior of this star. Because how can they didn't arbitrarily say, oh, there's Perseus, Algol is the brightest star in that constellation, and it's a Gorgon's head. They didn't just attach these evil characteristics to Algol out of nothing. Someone had to observe its movement and then write that down or communicate that to other people to the extent that it became common knowledge in the ancient world. So this idea isn't new. The idea that someone in the remote past did the hard work and observed these things, these celestial bodies, and then somehow is passed down from generation to generation. Because remember, there were a lot of books, like the Library of Alexandria burned down twice, there was conquest. Information was either traded or lost or held in secret, or people were trying to preserve knowledge for a long, long time. That's the story. That's a huge part of the story of the human history. So it does make sense that this Cairo Calendar parchment will pop up, and suddenly it makes mention of all these seemingly impossible things that they would know, but there's no trace in their knowledge. It was almost as if they wrote it down on this piece of paper as if it was common knowledge in their context, because they didn't even bother to say how they came to those conclusions, if you guys are following me. So here's another example. I always mention the precession of the equinoxes, the 25,920 year cycle of indicative or derived from the tilt on the Earth's axis, and it cycles through all the like the age of Leo, Aquarius, Aries, etc., until it makes one full cycle through the 12 zodiacs, starting back at square one. That takes 25,920 years. Now, the ancients knew about this, and again, I'm going to bring up the Dogon. The Dogon knew about this as well. How did they know about it? Without telescopes, without someone had to have lived for that long, or had this 25,920 year project to even come to that conclusion, to even know about it. So that in and of itself is probably the biggest example of this astronomical knowledge being passed down through whatever it is, secret societies, scripture, just oral culture, whatever it is. These people knew about it, and this article is a great example of how almost nonchalantly they just mention it in the Cairo Calendar, and anything associated with Algol in this case was unlucky. You don't want to do anything on a day when there's an eclipse or there's a variation in its brightness, which is what the Egyptian scribes are talking about. The scribes present celestial phenomena as the activity of gods. Obviously, that's how they explained a lot of things, through the will of the gods, and they called Algol back then the title of Horus. And the word Algol itself comes from I think it's the Arabic word of Algol, which is a demon. I'm pretty sure it's a demon. Yeah, it's a demon. And then the Gorgon obviously is a demon as well. The ancient Chinese thought it was a beast. So again, like this is a very common motif. And the most amazing thing is it's worldwide. So that's a head scratcher right there. So anyway, back to this paper that the scientists put out. It presents 10 arguments which show that the ancient Egyptian scribes, known as the Hour Watchers, had the possible means and motives to record their period of Algol in the Cairo Calendar. The discovery of Algol's variability would have to be dated to thousands of years earlier than have been previously known. The star would have been a part of ancient Egyptian mythology as a form of the god Horus. So a lot of these, this is part of the reason why these pantheon of gods, whether it's the Roman gods, the Greek gods, or the ancient Egyptian gods, they're all interchangeable. You even see it in the Judeo-Christian religions as well. It seems like it's just a way to transfer the truth of their knowledge after a conquest, or after a cultural change, or across language barriers and belief systems. And it does seem like a clever way to do that. And the fact that this remote tribe like the Dogon had all this information. At some point in time, someone who had the knowledge communicated it to them. They may not have communicated it in terms of mathematics or a way that would make sense to us in the modern day. They did it through rhetoric and gods and stories and legends and myths, and they had this whole system well thought out, and it's not as primitive as it looks on the surface. So what do you guys think about this? And anything I said at all makes sense. There's a lot of documentaries about this, and it does seem like a conundrum. How would they know? They didn't have the Hubble telescope. They didn't have spaceships. They didn't have a bunch of things. They weren't flying by the seat of their pants. I mean, it seems like they developed in a certain way that we didn't. So they had this special insight that drove their civilization. I mean, this is not trivial. This is something that kings and pharaohs and royalty and scribes and people who were educated by ancient standards, they treated this with not only respect, but as if it were logical truth. So when they're saying the wrath of Zeus or whatever, they're not being hyperbolic. They're being serious, and they're probably, especially if it's written down in something like the Cairo Calendar, and they even call them the hour watchers. So they must have had people dedicated to this one task to watch the skies, because again, as they believed in the saying "as above, so below," right? They always looked to the heavens for guidance. And I guess if I was a king and I grew up in this type of educational environment concerning the stars, I would take it very seriously, and I would assign learned people to the task of looking into the crystal ball, so to speak. But in this case, the crystal ball is the sky. So what do you guys think about this? What do you guys think about astrology? What do you guys think? A lot of people think it's pseudoscience, and probably today's version of it is definitely probably pseudoscience. Like, I mean, you can't tell when you're going to die. You can't predict the future by looking at the orbit of the stars to a certain extent. Like, I don't think that I'm going to be able to predict what I'm going to eat on Friday based on how Venus looks or anything like that. And I know I'm kind of straw manning it in a bit, but that's not what I'm talking about here. What I'm talking about are like cosmic events and any sort of that's what they were looking for, cosmic events, to whatever information they can glean from and apply it to their daily lives to try to influence their present day on Earth. And that's basically what people do now. We just don't look to the stars anymore for that. So let me know what you guys think, and I'll have all the links below, and I'll see you guys tomorrow.